This episode is brought to you by Merrill. We all have goals, and we all want to get to those goals, whether that's saving for a home renovation, that once-in-a-lifetime trip to your favourite Grand Prix, or even retirement. We all want a straightforward path to those goals, but the real world doesn't usually work that way. Merrill understands that. That's why with a dedicated Merrill advisor, you get a personalised plan and a clear path forward. And having the bull at your back helps your whole financial life move with you. So when your plans change, Merrill's with you every step of the way. Go to ml.com/bullish to learn more. Merrill, a Bank of America company. What would you like the power to do? Investing involves risk. Merrill Lynch, Pierce, Fenner & Smith Incorporated, registered broker-dealer, registered investment advisor, member SIPC.
This episode is supported by Merrill. With a dedicated Merrill advisor, you get a personalized plan for your financial goals. And when plans change, Merrill's with you every step of the way. Go to ml.com/bullish to learn more. Merrill, a Bank of America company. What would you like the power to do? Investing involves risk. Merrill Lynch, Pierce, Fenner & Smith Incorporated, registered broker-dealer, registered investment advisor, member SIPC.
Etsy knows these aren't the sounds of holiday gifting.
Oh.
Well, not the ones you're hoping for.
Ah, okay. Thank you?
You want squeals of delight.
Yes!
And spontaneously written songs of joy.
I am so happy. Oh yeah, oh yeah, oh yeah.
To get those, make everyone on your list feel heard with gifts like personalized jewelry, custom artwork, vintage pieces, and home decor. For original gifts that say, I get you, Etsy has it.
The Athletic.
The race is on, and with the Drivers' Championship already as good as won by Max Verstappen, what does Lando Norris need to do to take the step from race winner to real title contender in 2025? I'm Edd Straw, and joining me to tackle that topic and much more besides are Mark Hughes and Ben Anderson. Well, Mark, how are you doing? Enjoying a little bit of a gap after that frenetic triple header?
Yeah, that was all a bit wild, wasn't it? It's a bang, 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 and then a quick little gap to get on the right time zone, and then off to Qatar.
Yeah, for another bang, 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 as it were. But of course, before that, there's Las Vegas, Ben, which you'll be joining me for.
Yes, I will be. I'm delighted to be back on the podcast. I've been benched, I think, since, was it Austin the last time I appeared, post-race, bleary-eyed and
Well,
delirious.
you're the last number on the list, as we've established before, so when no one else can do it, you get drafted in.
I'm really, well, however it's come about, I'm very happy to be back in the starting lineup. And in Vegas, because I'll be there with you, you won't be able to ignore me.
Exactly. That's going to be an interesting weekend. I was going to say a fun weekend, but yeah, Vegas last year was interesting, I would say. So it has changed a little bit. Some of the timings have shifted around.
Okay.
I doubt if we'll have a 3 a.m. free practice session or whatever, but
it's got to be better the second time around, hasn't it? Surely. That's what I'm banking on.
It'll have lost its novelty. That's the trouble, though. If you take novelty away, maybe it'll just be but actually, no. I mean, Vegas is a great event. It's remarkable they've pulled it off, and despite the occasional complaints about it, it is a great race for F1 to have. But I'm sure we'll talk about Vegas a bit more closer to the time. We've got other things to talk about. First, Ben.
Yeah.
In the world of letter writing and statements, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
The Grand Prix Drivers Association responded to FI President Mohammed Ben Sulayem's crusade against swearing. Max Verstappen and Charles Leclerc have both been fined for bad language in press conferences recently. That's what triggered that. What struck you most about what the GPDA said?
Well, the unity for a start. You know, I don't think F1 drivers are united about many things. I don't think Max Verstappen and Lewis Hamilton are ever united about many things, but I think they're united in their displeasure with this sort of petty crusade, the latest petty crusade of the FIA and its president in particular. And when the letter landed in their shiny new Instagram account, I was quite dismissive initially. I thought, this is just kind of to be expected, a kind of summary of their disgruntlements with the FIA over recent times. But when you studied it a bit closer, there were just a number of middle fingers basically being verbally put up at Ben Sulayem in particular, because that's what they're calling out, really, this abrasive style he has of intervening almost unilaterally in things, and as I mentioned, kind of going after petty elements. That the swearing is obviously the spark for this, And most drivers have been quizzed endlessly about swearing since Max Verstappen was handed community service, and then obviously Leclerc got a different penalty for swearing in Mexico, a fine. And I guess this is their way of coming together and saying, well, this is actually what we think properly as a unit, and we don't agree with how this is being focused on, how it's being policed. But they bring up all these other things that have been kind of simmering in the background for a long time, going back even to Lewis Hamilton's jewellery gate and the drivers wearing the right kind of underpants. I think this is the latest in a long-running saga of F1, and now the drivers in particular not really liking the way Mohammed Ben Sulayem runs the FIA as regards Formula One.
Yeah, there's some very pointed bits in there. They asked them about where the fines money goes.
Yeah.
For the past 3 years, we have called upon the FIA president to share the details and strategy regarding how the FIA's financial fines are allocated and where the funds are spent. And there was, sort of a shining a light on the way Ben Sulayem has communicated all these things. Mark, what do you make of it? Ultimately, I don't have a problem with the basics of, press conferences, public forum, that kind of thing. You can have kind of a light touch, ideally don't swear, but I guess it's the heavy-handedness and the way everything's been done and the lack of communication, which is bizarre because you often hear Ben Sulayem saying he speaks to the drivers, etc. But he's obviously, if he is speaking to them, he's not telling them the details they want to hear, and the impression is he's not listening.
I think, it's more a matter of style than content that they're getting head up about. It's the sort of dictatorial manner he's trying to impose upon them, and they as a group are saying, you can't dictate to us. We're united, so we would appreciate a more civilized way of discussion, and don't treat us like children. I think this is the crux of it.
Yeah, it's that kind of maturity element, isn't it? Like, there's a way of going about things. They seem to be saying, rather than just making a declaration in the media and saying, this is now going to happen by order of me, can you not just come and talk to us on the quiet, lay out your concerns, figure out a more collaborative way to do things before it escalates and gets out of hand? I think the past tells us that Ben Sulayem doesn't react too well to public criticism like this, and I don't expect him to suddenly become contrite and think, maybe I need to change my ways, although that would probably do him some good. But I do think he won't like being called out by the drivers as a group, because I feel like he's quite personally obsessed with the drivers, and we often see when we're watching races remotely, him coming into shot when drivers are celebrating pole position or getting ready for the podium. So I think the drivers criticising him will sting. So maybe there's an element of, if we all club together and actually all say, look, mate, you need to change your ways, that might finally get through. And
of course, he likes to kind of group himself in with the drivers, doesn't he? Because he's had won the Middle East Rally Championship an enormous number of times, 14 times from memory. So he likes to sort of say as a driver, which sometimes people find quite amusing. I've known a few people in those circles to joke about that. So it is, and I think, Mark, you're right about the style of communication, because even things like the wearing of jewellery and underpants, that does sound trivial, but at the same time, there's a safety element to that in terms of, the impact jewellery can have on the fire protection. Obviously, underpants and all your fireproof underwear has to be to the right standard, etc. So it's one of these things whereby the baseline of what's being done isn't ridiculous, but it's just been done in an appalling way. And we keep hearing this about when things are changed or when things are done. Then the drivers say, well, we weren't told about this. So there's a lot going on here in terms of the drivers' relationship with the FIA, and even the drivers. They don't talk about it in this statement, but George Russell has said a number of times in recent races that he wants to see full-time professional stewards to try and improve the consistency and that kind of thing. So there's a whole batch of problems they've got with the way the regulator is behaving.
Yeah, and I think it might be partly a cultural thing. And that's just the way in Ben Sulayem's part of the world that things are expressed, and that you have someone in charge telling others how it's going to be. I think he might be tripping over that on occasion, but really, I don't think it needs to be a big serious thing. It's just it's irritated. It's irritated the drivers, and this is their unified response. And it's not really about swearing or jewelry or underpants. It's just he's picked those as a battleground, and it's irritated them.
Yeah, and ultimately, I think everyone wants to see the FIA as a regulator being able to be a strong regulator. That is important. F1 does need that, but perhaps these aren't the things to be strong and didactic on, and you need a bit of a more collaborative thing. I think Ben Sulayem will be in a better position with the drivers on side than with this polarisation.
Yeah, I think that's the point, isn't it? Battleground is a good word. Like everything just seems to be confrontational when it comes to his interventions, and he seems to be a bit more interventionist than his predecessor in Formula One, but just in a slightly cack-handed way. And it's like he's wrong for the right reasons. There's a lot, like you said, Ed, that actually you can't really argue with the ultimate aim of, F1's a really popular sport right now, really popular motorsport right now, with a big following. You want the drivers to be role models to people and to just be careful about how they present themselves, how they come across. But there's a way of going about trying to engender that shift, a subtle shift in how you act or what you do to just try and align better with, what the FIA wants. But we can't seem to get to a point where there's that trust. And it goes back to just so many different seemingly petty and trivial examples of a thing just not being handled sensitively, being just bludgeoned basically in people's faces. And so the trust isn't there. It's whatever was there is eroded, and it just seems like at the moment an impossible thing to rebuild. And what we have here is a extraordinary unified statement from a group that isn't usually unified on many things, effectively challenging his authority and saying, well, yeah, we'd like to play by the rules and do what you want, but at the moment, no thanks, we don't like the way you're going about it. They're fighting fire with fire, aren't they? Because he won't do things on the quiet and collaboratively, so they haven't done the things on the quiet and collaboratively. They've just decided to come out with an explosive public statement against the way he's been behaving.
Yeah, and it now comes down to a question of, is the response to escalate or to try and collaborate and get it all a bit more under control? I think collaboration would be a good way to approach this, because I think it would be to the benefit of the FIA's position, which obviously, given F1 is the side that has all the income, and the FIA needs that cash in order to regulate F1 the way it wants to. I think it's better for them to be on side with the drivers. So, yeah, let's see what the next step in that is. Mark, we'll move on now to the topic of Lando Norris. We know he won't be winning the 2024 World Championship. And as we've been saying for months, he never really got himself into serious contention. He was just never close enough in terms of points. Good chance he'll be in the hunt next year. So what still needs to come from him if he's to take that step and be a World Championship calibre driver?
Well, I'd argue he's already a World Championship calibre driver, but everything's relative, and he's not been quite at the level of Max Verstappen. But there have been drivers who have won world titles with a lower level of overall performance than this, or with more errors or less raw speed or some combination of that. So if what we're asking is what will it take to beat Verstappen, I honestly think you need a machinery advantage to do that. Probably only a small one, but Verstappen's so sort of all-encompassing in his strengths that he's literally almost impossible to beat in equal machinery at the moment. And the recurring criticism of Lando this year is that he's been not aggressive enough against Verstappen, and there is a certain logic in saying, okay, I'm not going to yield the next time Max adopts the yield or the we crash approach, and I'm quite willing to have the crash and to keep having the crash until Max learns there's no point in racing me that way. But that wasn't actually a situation he could adopt this season, was it? Because by the time Lando's car became competitive, which was round 6 in Miami, Max already had a big points lead. So any collision between them would always favour Max because it freezes the points lead. And there's no two ways about it. Max exploited that, and Lando talked openly about that being the situation he was in, and he knew he had to avoid contact above all else. So although those two roles could look like the bully and the bullied, you could also see it as the points leader and the chaser who couldn't afford non-finishes. But like the wider point, is there a sort of psychological barrier there for Lando in future? And you were making assumptions that both he and Verstappen have competitive cars from the start of the season, and we're making a lot of assumptions about, say, where Ferrari is and how fast they are. But just if we make that assumption, is there a psychological barrier in Norris adopting that no compromise approach needed to race Max on equal terms? Yeah, I think it would require a step up from him, not to the extent of initiating things like making no attempt at a corner to get by or defend. I don't think his racing etiquette would ever allow him to do that. But at the very least, I think it requires him to sharpen up on his car placement in these battles, going in with the full knowledge and expectation of how Max will race him. And I think we saw with his turn 4 move in Mexico, he'd already begun doing that because he was absolutely there, as hard and ruthless as he needed to be in how far he pincered Max in. And then he left it up to Max to see if Max would run him out wide, and sure enough he did. But I think his initial placement there was spot on, and that's exactly how he's going to have to race him. It was a bit more savvy than his dice in Austria, for example. But I think, ultimately we can only be who we are, and I think Lando is unfortunate that he's got his good car at a time when Verstappen's at his absolute peak, and Max is he's a winning animal with no questions in his head. Just desire. And I feel Lando will always have questions.
Yeah, that's something that's very formidable about Verstappen, isn't it? Because Norris, I think as a driver, in terms of pace, as a technician behind the wheel, he's very intelligent in the way he approaches things. He's very good at adapting his style, very good at whether it's doing a single push lap or stringing together a long stint, managing tyres. He's very, very clever. He's got all the tricks in the toolkit for doing that. And yeah, it's that question of, has he got what Verstappen's got, which is just this ironclad, ruthless certainty, which is a powerful weapon when you harness it with the fact that Verstappen also is a fantastic driver in every way. I mean, Ben, how do you look at it? When you're comparing him to Verstappen, do you think that it's the best you can ever do is kind of get on terms with Verstappen if you're in equal machinery, because there's just no fundamental weaknesses? And so do we have to sort of factor in it's not just any slight areas where Norris has got a slight weakness, but just also the fact that he's trying to storm an impregnable castle?
Yeah, it's a good way of putting it. I mean, we don't know if the castle is impregnable because it hasn't really been fully tested yet. The question of equal machinery, I mean, they're probably never going to be in equal machinery because it's unlikely they're going to be teammates, I feel. So there might be a situation where the McLaren and Red Bull are roughly equal next year in certain places or across the spread of the season, but they're never going to be identical. And I think that's, Mark, you made a very good point in terms of it being assumptions based, because the balance of power has been in favour of Max from the point at which Norris and he have been racing closely, based on that strong start Max had this year and the McLaren only coming on strong later. And the extra pressure of the Constructors' Championship, as well as any collision benefiting Max more in the Drivers' Championship, Norris can't afford to risk losing a big block of points for McLaren's main push. So he's strangled more by that as well and constrained. I think it's fair to say that he doesn't look as streetwise or as battle hardened as Max, but he wouldn't be because he hasn't been running at the front for as long and against as many guys. But I do think, and Mark alluded to this too, he has been improving. Like if you look at the specific weaker spots, probably starts was the first one we saw. He had a few grid advantages over Max that he squandered in the first few yards. And whether that was purely him or a mix of him and the car, he's worked on that. And latterly they've been a lot better. In terms of the wheel to wheel, Mexico's a good example. In Austin, I think he did get bullied by Max, and probably in Austria too. But by Mexico, that wasn't the case. He was much more assertive, almost caught Max by surprise, which is hard to do, but is what you need to do, because if you give him a chance to kind of work out his defence, you're kind of screwed, basically. So he's figured some things out and made some adjustments. The one thing I think we haven't yet seen him do that Max does a lot, is be harder on his team and take more of the lead from inside the car. I feel like he's still a bit too passive in terms of how he deals with McLaren and the key decisions and trying to turn a race in his favour when there's a marginal call to be made. Whereas Max is, I mean, you could criticise him for being too assertive and too abrasive, but that's the culture that Red Bull has allowed to foster and they feel it's productive. Obviously, there's more than one way to do that because that's a tricky psychological game that's related to how other people perform as well. But it does feel to me like Lando's natural personality, not that he's a shrinking violet or anything, but he doesn't seem quite as assertive in terms of how he works with the team as Max is. And it's a question of whether, again, with a more equal start and just a bit of learning, will Norris actually coalesce and be much closer to Max in that regard? Or is that just a fundamental different way of doing things and Max is more effective? I don't know yet. Yeah, just on that, I heard signs that may be improving as well in qualifying in Brazil, where he's done a run and his engineer asked him about the balance and he said, another turn, 1.5 turns on the front wing, and the engineer had said 1.5 might be a bit too much. I suggest 1. He said 1.5, please. Nice. And that was it. End of discussion. Yeah. You know? And then that more of that. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
The great strength I think Norris has is he does learn, he does work at it very studiously, and that's why I'm extremely interested to see what happens when he has the off-season, he has the time to kind of go over everything he's done this year. He can go into next year with a reasonable expectation of fighting for the championship. Very, very different mindset there. I do think the starts are something of a red herring because his starts generally are pretty good. If you look at the overall start performance through the field, he's generally reasonably well up there.
Compared to Max, though, it's Max we're talking about, isn't it? Like the Red Bull Max starts are just dynamite every time, aren't they?
Exactly, yeah.
They are, but when you look at the reaction times, Max's reaction times are usually slower than Lando's. Yeah. So, and I think Sainz made the point that on low grip surfaces, that Red Bull is just dynamite, off the grid. So
it's a technical thing, then.
Yeah, I think it might be more technical than than just them getting the squits about the start.
There's a lot going on in the starts in terms of how they're set up for them, how you get the clutch in the right place. There's a lot of data crunching, a lot of live work done to do that, and there's all sorts of reasons. It's not just driver.
So we're talking about small things then, really. That it does seem like Lando's already making headway on. So then it just comes down to if they can have a battle where all things are equal and the cars are roughly similar in performance from the start of the season, then we get to see what he's really about, because judging his peaks as a driver this year and those kind of performances where everything's come together, like Zandvoort, like Singapore, he looked on absolutely the right level. So there's no question that in terms of performance as a driver, he can absolutely do it. But as ever in Formula One, you need all those other ingredients to come together at just the right time. And with a driver as good as Max, you can't afford to hand him an advantage.
Yeah, and you had a couple of moments even in that Singapore victory for Norris too.
Yes, that's true. Yeah, he was a bit leery, wasn't he, in that final stint?
But I think, sort of going back to the point made earlier, I think a lot of you're asking if could he be a world champion? I think a lot of the previous world champions have been fortunate that they didn't have opposition of the caliber of Verstappen. There's always a great driver. There's always great drivers throughout the history of the sport. But to get someone so bulletproof, so without any way in, I think is very, very rare. And I think most world champions have won with a sort of, a few errors here and there in their campaign. But they've just made fewer or performed better than the main opposition, and that's all you have to do. And I just think Norris is unfortunate to have got that car just at this time.
But 2025 might be the best chance, because if Red Bull's trajectory remains similar, this is probably the first time since part of 2021 or before that Max hasn't had close to the best car on the grid. And so he's going to get this one over the line because they built that advantage up in the first 5 races or so before McLaren came on strong. And he has been brilliant in defending that advantage. But if he's going to defend this championship next year, he can't afford for Red Bull to be at the level they are now. And if McLaren stay at their current level, then it's probably advantage Norris, isn't it?
Yeah, it could well be. And there's obviously the whole battle with Piastri as well to look at. I actually think that's probably a positive for Norris, simply because he learns so much. So having someone in the other car who's on a steep upward trajectory as well, I think will help him find new ways to learn. I think that's the big strength for Norris. Is he's still, obviously he's quite an experienced Grand Prix driver now, but there's still improvements in his game that are being made. So it's a question of when that upward curve stops. I mean, I'd agree. I think all things being equal, I would always back Verstappen over Norris, but I'd back Verstappen over almost every driver in Grand Prix history. All things being equal, he's that good. So yeah, that's the problem. So I think we'll see more from Norris next year. So it's a question of when he hits that ceiling.
The Race F1 podcast is brought to you by Merrill. It's no secret that finances can get complicated. Like me, I'm sure many of you listening will have financial goals. Perhaps it's even saving up for that trip to a Grand Prix far afield. Whatever your goals are, from starting a business to saving for kids' college to getting more stamps in your passport, you want a straightforward path there. But life tends to have other plans, and things get in your way. Merrill understands that. That's why with a dedicated Merrill advisor, you get a personalised plan that can help keep your money in sync with your life. So with the bull at your back, no matter what life brings, you get a clear path forward. Go to ml.com/bullish to learn more. Merrill, a Bank of America company. What would you like the power to do? Investing involves risk. Merrill Lynch, Pierce, Fenner & Smith Incorporated, registered broker-dealer, registered investment advisor, member SIPC.
This episode is supported by Merrill. With a dedicated Merrill advisor, you get a personalized plan for your financial goals. And when plans change, Merrill's with you every step of the way. Go to ml.com/bullish to learn more. Merrill, a Bank of America company. What would you like the power to do? Investing involves risk. Merrill Lynch, Pierce, Fenner & Smith Incorporated, registered broker-dealer, registered investment advisor, member SIPC.
As you've probably heard by now, we've teamed up with BetMGM this season. We'll be using BetMGM lines to make all of our picks, and we'll have special offers for our listeners each week. If you haven't signed up for BetMGM yet, use bonus code The Athletic, and you'll get a 1-year subscription to The Athletic, plus up to a $1,500 first bet offer on your first wager with BetMGM. Here's how it works. Download the BetMGM app and sign up using bonus code The Athletic. Make your first deposit of at least $10. Place your first bet on any game and claim your voucher for a 1-year subscription to The Athletic. See BetMGM.com for terms. U.S. promotional offers not available in D.C., Mississippi, New York, Nevada, Ontario, or Puerto Rico. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. Available in the U.S. Call 877-8-HOPE-NY or text HOPE-NY 467-369 in New York. Call 1-800-NEXT-STEP in Arizona. 1-800-327-5050 in Massachusetts. 1-800-BETS-OFF in Iowa. 1-800-270-7117 for confidential help in Michigan. 1-800-981-0023 in Puerto Rico. First bet offer for new customers only in partnership with Kansas Crossing Casino and Hotel. Don't forget, if you haven't signed up for BetMGM yet, use bonus code The Athletic, and you'll get a 1-year subscription to The Athletic, plus up to a $1,500 first bet offer on your first wager.
Well, we've got a question about Mercedes from the Race Members Club in a moment, but this is a great opportunity because recently I had the chance to chat on a book club episode exclusively for race members to Matt Whyman, author of a new book titled Inside Mercedes F1, Life in the Fast Lane. Matt was granted unprecedented behind-the-scenes access to the Mercedes team, and I want to play you a segment of our chat now. And remember, if you want to hear the full conversation, you'll need to join the Race Members Club, which is home to bonus podcasts, ad-free listening, members discounts, including 15% off in the race shop, where we're now selling 2025 F1, bring back V10s and MotoGP calendars, and much, much more. To join, head to patreon.com/the race or hit the link in the description for this show. And now, here's me and Matt. As part of the great access you had, you're seeing things that outsiders will never see. Like there's one bit where you're talking about the debrief, I think in Miami in 23, and you make an observation about the difference between George Russell and Lewis Hamilton's feedback.
Yeah.
You say Russell's fiercely analytical, and Hamilton's feedback comes from a more intimate, emotional place when he talks. So I thought that was interesting about the different ways drivers communicate, and that was something I thought I'd ask you about. Is that something you sort of saw consistently through that, and did that give you an appreciation of there's different ways for drivers to do the same thing well?
I think the most immediate thing that struck me when I sat down in a driver's debrief was just the level of detail that the drivers provide from an experience where they're driving at over 200 miles an hour around a racetrack, and they can say in very descriptive language, whether it's an emotional kind of description from Lewis or a very lyrical, I would say, description from George. So George will say something like the car is hopping in the mid exit of turn 5, and I just remember thinking, but you're doing God knows what speed going around that corner, and you've noted that, you know this very precise. I knew exactly what he meant, hopping. And speaking to James Allison after one of these debriefs, he was saying that in some ways the drivers they've got thousands of sensors on these cars. And they can pick up loads of data from the cars at any moment in time around the track. And in some ways, the driver is another sensor. But what he doesn't want from the driver, he doesn't want the driver to tell him what's wrong with the car. He just wants to know the one thing that no sensor can provide, which is, how does it feel? How does it feel when you go around this corner? And you leave it to the engineers to translate that language of how does it feel to mechanical and aerodynamic terms, which was endlessly fascinating to me. As soon as I sort of understood what the mechanism of what was going on in this conversation, it struck me that that's almost where George and Lewis earned their money, actually, in just being so descriptive. As I say, Lewis is very emotional. If something isn't quite working for him in the car, on track, his tone drops, and it's really important to him that it's addressed. And he believes in the team, and he knows that the team will do their utmost, but he always wants to get 100% from the team at any one time. George surprised me at one point, actually, because I'd said to him in conversation that I was really struck by his use of language, because he's very descriptive. It's almost like he's an English major, but he slightly misunderstood what I meant by you have a very descriptive way of talking. He thought I was talking about the way he expresses himself, and he said, "Oh well," when I was younger, I had speech therapy because I was mumbling," and that really wasn't what I intended to ask him about. But then suddenly this kind of revelation came out that he had speech therapy to make himself, this is I think before his motor racing career, but to make himself speak clearer. And then he said that in his early career he worked with an Italian race engineer who only had 2 words of English, which I think was 2 sugars and an espresso or something like that. So again, he knew that if he wanted to get the best out of his race engineer, he would have to express himself as clearly as possible. He was talking about intonation, I was talking about vocabulary, but I think the combination of both, I could listen to George and Lewis describing their way around a lap for hours on end. It's endlessly fascinating, because even as a non-engineer, I know exactly what they mean, and I don't think many people could do it. Talking to other race engineers, they said that there are other drivers who aren't that good at it. George and Lewis, it's a kind of almost like an unrecognized thing, are very good translators or very good sensors, if you like, in terms of how does it feel. Other drivers, they can be supremely talented on track, and then they'll sit down in the debrief and they'll go, well, I don't know, it was all right. And it's very difficult then for an engineer to translate what that means. But George and Lewis, between them, are mesmerizing when they talk about how does it feel to go around this track.
Yeah, and I think that's the kind of insight that this book offers, in that people probably wouldn't be too surprised to hear that Russell's very good at that, because some of that comes across in the stuff he says in public. Lewis doesn't talk about that so much, and so you can see, people might just assume he's not got that level of detail. But interesting to sort of see behind the curtain a bit there in that regard.
As an outsider, when I first went into the garage and I donned a pair of headphones, I think it's very easy when you're a casual viewer to watch the cars being backed up into the garage, and the camera closes in on the cockpit, and there is the driver in front of his screens on the cockpit, and they just look like they're sitting there in silence. And it was kind of almost a revelation to me that when Lewis came in and they plugged in the umbilical, which is the communication lead between the garage and the driver, he doesn't stop talking. It was just this endless outpouring of analysis about what was going on with the car all around the track. And that was, obviously, it's all confidential information which can't be broadcast because it's so important. But in witnessing that, in listening to that, it just brought a whole new level of insight into what a driver does. You know, they're not just sitting there in their own little private world in the cockpit in the garage. They're working hard to get the best out of the car, even though it's not moving.
Well, interesting stuff there. I really enjoyed that interview. I enjoyed reading the book, and there's loads more in that exclusive Members Club interview. But Mark, on to our Mercedes-related question now from Urban Strenchan. Urban asks, whatever happened to Mercedes? Once again, they are falling behind the rest at the top. So this is kind of a big, broad question about Mercedes in 2024.
Yeah, but it could be a question from any time in the last 3 seasons, couldn't it? I think the challenges of these cars keep changing as everyone fine-hones them. And Mercedes is still clearly lacking that last bit of detail on all the driving differentiators of these ground effect cars. And at the moment, it's not good in slow corners, not good in a hot track. There's a very small window of conditions and where set up where it's quick. But in the past, it's been bouncing, or it's been fast corners, or there's always something that it's just not. When they fix one problem, it becomes a problem somewhere else. It's difficult to put your finger on why this team, which had been so dominant in the past, is still not quite getting to the bottom of it after 3 seasons. But there's plenty of creativity and innovation there. There's plenty of hard science there, but there's something crucial missing in the detail, as if they're not quite chasing the right targets. And it's impossible to know from the outside. You'd need to be inside McLaren or Ferrari or Red Bull and then be inside Mercedes and compare the processes and listen to the discussions. And obviously that's not going to happen if you're a member of the media, but there are probably engineers with the knowledge and experience who could bring insight if they were recruited. But in fact, there's probably been more emigrations out of Mercedes into those teams than vice versa. So, this ground effect generation of cars are tricky. They don't respond to the same developmental things as previous cars, and the aerodynamic traits are extremely non-linear. And even the things you're chasing aren't necessarily the things you were chasing before in terms of just efficient downforce. Yes, that's still important, but it's not the be-all and end-all anymore. It's a much more nuanced and subtle range of demands that these cars have. And all the evidence says that Mercedes just haven't quite got a handle on it, and their car's too sensitive and its window of performance is too narrow.
Yeah, it feels like just the challenge of taking on the 3-dimensionality of these cars, and that there's lots of limitations to bounce off, and you've got to factor them all in simultaneously.
Yeah, and it's so easy to fall off that really narrow ledge, isn't it? I mean, Red Bull have done it this year. They seem to have completely cracked it. And then this year they've just had a big mess until very recently. And then Ferrari, which came out the blocks quite strongly relative to last year, then got lost in the middle, which is when kind of Mercedes looked a bit better. But maybe they were flattered slightly by the run of tracks, suiting their car's tendency for high-speed characteristics this year compared to low-speed last year. And the conditions maybe being cooler. Obviously, Silverstone was wet, wasn't it? They seem to be quite good in the wet, relatively. Not so good, as you say, when it's hot. And then Ferrari came back with that Monza floor and then the subsequent upgrades, and they've clicked right back there again. It's only really McLaren that have been able to kind of consistently do it, step after step, upgrade after upgrade, and maintain or improve their level, whereas everyone else has had this kind of yo-yo up and down. It just feels like Mercedes, when they yo-yo, it's just a bit more extreme. And even when the car is strong, they don't quite know exactly why it has been strong. It's like, oh, well, that was in the window, great. And then they're like, we've cracked it. And then even from one day to the next at the same track, oh no, now it's all completely gone and we've hardly changed the car and the performance has disappeared. And that's the bit I really don't understand, is how they can be so track conditions sensitive compared to everybody else.
Yeah, certainly the sensitivity has been a persistent problem. This is the kind of stubborn characteristic they've not managed to shift over the past few years. But it's strange, isn't it, Mark? Because you have these moments where it feels like the team has turned a corner, which it did mid-season, and the team seems to think it has, and then it falls back into it. So that sort of points to, even though they've tried hard to get to the root of this, they're always sort of fiddling around the edges of it. And even when they make the steps they did, they've made good progress this year. Obviously, that front wing that first appeared at Monaco that allowed them to improve that.
I thought they'd cracked it with that.
Well, yeah, exactly.
I thought that was the. I know Wolf likes to say there are no silver bullets or magic bullets, but that felt like the one that they really needed. And the subsequent performances and results suggested that really had been a game changer. But now they just feel like they've kind of regressed again, which is strange to me.
Yeah, and I think that because, as we've touched on, it is quite good in certain conditions. It's this particular car is quite good on fast tracks. It's quite good in cool conditions, and if you got a combination of those, then it's going to be somewhere in the picture. And if that has coincided with some changes that they've made, development parts or setup, it's going to look like you've cracked it, and then you get away from those conditions, and you're back again. You're back to where you were. So there's a lot of that going on, which I think is what I mean by, I don't think they've fully understood the detail. There's something elusive in the detail, and it's nagging at them, and they're just not catching it.
And then probably on top of that, they've had a similar kind of upgrade misstep that you see up and down the grid. It was Spa, wasn't it, where a track that did suit them and conditions that suited them, but they bought that floor that didn't quite work, and I feel like they've been unpicking that pretty much since.
It's funny, this is part of the trouble, because Andrew Chauvelin was talking about this at some point during the triple header. It's all merged into one in my mind. He said, well, yeah, the Spa floor did work, but it was only a small gain. But it's difficult to, because it's a small gain, untangle that from the wider noise that's going on in terms of fluctuation. So I think that sums up part of the problem, that they were confident that floor was yielding a gain, but they couldn't be certain of it. So this is
they can't prove it in reality, basically.
Exactly.
It's that kind of like, it's that Alonso point, isn't it, where everything falls apart the closer you get to the limit. Actually your whole picture can be confused by the fact that just everything's really difficult on the circuit, and even though the team can be convinced that X part is worth Y gain, it's sometimes impossible to realise that gain just because of how difficult it is to make the cars work on the limit, generically.
Yeah, and it's doubly difficult because, let's say, just for the sake of argument, you put 1/10 of a second of performance on a car, but your car fluctuates to the tune of half a second depending on myriad other factors. It just gets, that signal gets obliterated by all the other noise. So that, I think, perhaps sums up some of the troubles Mercedes are having. I mean, it's positive that they are making progress, and the car does have a good turn of pace, even if it's somewhat fleeting when it does come. So that's good. But yeah, a lot of head scratching.
This has been a better season than last season,
definitely,
right? I feel like amid a mess of ground effect seasons, this has felt like a bit more of a together season.
It has,
to me,
insofar as they've managed to win 3 races. Yeah. And okay, there was a little bit of fortune on their side in some of those cases, but at the same time, they weren't doing that. They won 1 race across the previous 2 seasons, so that's positive. But they're still also a distant 4th, and obviously Lewis Hamilton's pretty despondent with life. So yeah, it's going to be, once again, the question of, can they learn from all that experience, take the step with next year's car, and until they do and consistently deliver that step, then Mercedes stays in this box of, no, you're just not there yet. And it must be intensely frustrating to be in that situation in that team.
This episode is brought to you by Merrill. We all have goals, and we all want to get to those goals, whether that's saving for a home renovation, that once-in-a-lifetime trip to your favourite Grand Prix, or even retirement. We all want a straightforward path to those goals, but the real world doesn't usually work that way. Merrill understands that. That's why with a dedicated Merrill advisor, you get a personalised plan and a clear path forward. And having the bull at your back helps your whole financial life move with you. So when your plans change, Merrill's with you every step of the way. Go to ml.com/bullish to learn more. Merrill, a Bank of America company. What would you like the power to do? Investing involves risk. Merrill Lynch, Pierce, Fenner & Smith Incorporated, registered broker-dealer, registered investment advisor, member SIPC.
Your time and expertise are valuable. And with professionals spending nearly half the work week on written communication, focus is one of the most important things to have at work. With Grammarly as your AI writing partner, you can stay focused and get through your work faster with relevant, real-time suggestions wherever you write. As a journalist and podcast host, I'm constantly writing and rewriting copy and drawing up scripts. It's part of the job, and Grammarly helps make it faster. It's got some really cool features like tone suggestions to help you strike the right balance between direct and friendly in work emails. Plus, Grammarly has a ton of other great features like advanced spelling, grammar, punctuation, and conciseness suggestions to ensure your writing is professional, mistake-free, and clear. And best of all, Grammarly works across 500,000 apps and websites, allowing you to work smarter, not longer. For 15 years, Grammarly has helped professionals do more with their writing. So what are you waiting for? Get more done with Grammarly. Download Grammarly for free at grammarly.com/podcast. That's grammarly.com/podcast.
This episode is supported by Merrill. With a dedicated Merrill advisor, you get a personalized plan for your financial goals. And when plans change, Merrill's with you every step of the way. Go to ml.com/bullish to learn more. Merrill, a Bank of America company. What would you like the power to do? Investing involves risk. Merrill Lynch, Pierce, Fenner & Smith Incorporated, registered broker-dealer, registered investment advisor, member SIPC.
Right, for the final part of the podcast, we've got a bunch of the Race Members Club questions to go through. Mark, the first one for you from Rolich Kaiser. How good are the Alpine drivers? What do you reckon they could do in front-running machinery? Esteban Ocon, in particular, never got his chance. And how do you rank Ocon's wet weather and overtaking abilities? And Sam Douglas asked a similar question on Ocon, asking if he's akin to Rafa Nadal at the French Open tennis. Nadal, of course, won the French Open an astonishing 14 times, but in this comparison, we're substituting clay court prowess for wet weather ability.
They're both very good at their peak, but I don't believe they can deliver their peak as consistently as the real elite drivers. I'd say a low top 10. I think in front-running machinery, they'd win a few races, but I don't think either would be consistently as quick as, say, Leclerc, Norris, Russell, or in a top car, let alone Verstappen. Ocon is, as you say, terrific wet weather driver, but I don't think he has the last tenth of raw speed in the dry. He was no quicker than Perez at Force India. He was comprehensively outperformed by Ricciardo at Renault. I think Gasly has more raw speed and is fantastic in fast corners, but Ocon maybe has a better grasp of the technicalities. They're both tough. They're both very tough psychologically, and Ocon on track can be incredibly difficult to pass. He gives absolutely nothing. He really is a hard guy to race. So he has that strength. They've each got strengths. They've each got real strengths. And when circumstances conspire, they're each capable of great performances. No, I don't see any parallels between Nadal and Ocon. I see Ocon as a good level professional, capable of greatness on his day, but not an all-time great of his sport.
Yeah, that's often the difference, isn't it? It's the consistency, the adaptability, the capacity to deliver brilliantly, absolutely week in, week out, that separates the kind of great Grand Prix drivers from the very, very good ones. Ben, a question from Michael Grayless. Is it time to rethink red flags during qualifying? I like the way they handle it in IndyCar.
So this refers to the age-old problem of what to do if you cause a red flag and then ruin a session for your fellow drivers as a result, but somehow benefit from that because you happen to do your decent lap time before said incident. So the IndyCar system, as I understand it, if you cause a red flag, you lose your 2 best lap times. This is from our IndyCar correspondent, Jack Benyon, so thanks to Jack for this. And you're banned from graduating to the next segment, if there is one. And if you cause a yellow, you lose just one lap, you lose your best lap. So they're quite stringent on basically people misbehaving or making mistakes, let's say, in qualifying sessions. And I can see the logic in that. You know, we've had quite controversial incidents in the past, especially at Monaco, haven't we? Of people crashing, not intentionally necessarily, although that has happened too, and then being able to benefit from that. I mean, Leclerc got a pole. I think you mentioned this, Ed, to me before the show, right? He got a pole and then crashed, and that pole was locked in. Verstappen was infamously furious with Perez for looping his car and out qualifying him by dint of the fact that there's no time to do another lap. So although it doesn't help the other drivers who were badly affected by, you know, the stoppage, which is going to be necessary, you know, especially in Brazil where the conditions were so awful. If someone crashes and there are bits all over the track, you've got to stop the session, and what time is left is what time is left. You know, you can't add the time back on. It's down to people to modify their run plans, sometimes forgo the benefit of maybe better track conditions at the end by banking a time earlier on when there's maybe less chaos going on. That's part of the strategy of it. But I do have some sympathy with this idea that, you know, if you cause this mess, that you shouldn't unintentionally benefit from it. So I think in the case of qualifying in Brazil, Stroll, wasn't it, who effectively ended up in Q3 but couldn't take part in it because he'd crashed and obliterated his car. He probably should be, you know, denied that progression, and everyone else should shuffle up. I think that's probably worth looking at.
I think that would have been good news for Valtteri Bottas, wouldn't it? I think he was 11th in Q2 there from memory. But yeah, I mean, there is an element to which red flags in qualifying are always going to cause problems. That's just one of those things, and Interlagos was an extreme example. Question from Ansi Rulamo that I will take. Why do modern F1 tracks not use corner names anymore? That was one of the fun things growing up as an F1 fan in the 1990s, learning all the corner names. Interlagos was one of the tracks where every corner had a name, but it seems modern tracks only use numbers to denote corners. Yeah, there is a certain sanitisation of that and homogenisation. There's a practical element to it because teams use corner names, because if you're a driver and you have to learn however many corner names it would be across the year to reference, you'd risk having confusion and that kind of thing. And that sort of then spreads everywhere. Some tracks, particularly newer tracks, don't always have corner names. Sometimes you get ones that they put an effort into them, but they're also, sometimes the corner names are a little bit forced as well. So yeah, it's very, very difficult. And I also think in terms of communicating it to those watching, I think if people are watching, say, Interlagos, this is just my feeling, I could be completely wrong, but I think if you say to people, the Senna S as it's now called, or Junção maybe, perhaps Ferradura, people will know where it is. But if you refer to, I don't know, Bico de Pato, which is the duckbill, that's less well known. So there is that element of some corner names are well known, others are not, and I think that's why it leans towards the turn number. And of course, F1 itself, you know, if it's a steward's investigation into an incident, it'll be a turn 3 incident, that kind of thing. So I think it's a clarity thing that's used by teams and the FIA and F1 itself, and that's kind of just spread into common use.
I think British circuits have got a really good line on corner names. I mean, Dingledale, what a fantastic name. You know, or Maggots, you know,
the bomb hole. The
bomb hole, yeah, absolutely, yeah, fantastic.
Very good in a French accent, the bomb hole.
Yeah, so it's a good point. There might be, I suspect there'll be different countries have different traditions with this sort of thing as well. Some don't have that tradition of names, whereas Britain, with its really old circuits, ultimately maybe has an advantage there.
Yeah, it's just part of the data-driven way of modern life, isn't it? You know, it suits the competitors to have corner numbers because you can break down some of these things that, you know, these names that refer to interconnected sequences of bends that might be 2 or 3 or more, like the S's at Suzuka, for example. You know, that's how many corners in total? 4, 6. If you're trying to break that bit down from a point of analysing it and improving your car or improving your driving, you need it to be basically turns 3 to 8, don't you? Because they're slightly separate from each other as well in that sense. So I can see why from both that point of view and then also, as you mentioned, Ed, the stewarding point of view, it's much clearer and precise to have numbers than it is to have the slightly more fun and romantic corner names.
Next question for you, Mark, from Ed R. Gaming. How good is Ollie Behrman? Is he viewed as a potential world champion like Kimi Antonelli, or just a very good driver like Franco Colapinto and Liam Lawson? Also in the Sky commentary, they said he has a very impressive driving style. So what is his style, and is it like any other driver on the grid?
Behrman is at that stage in his career where the potential is clear to see, but with no way of knowing yet what access he will have to that potential. And then that's all about intelligence and personal development. He's got great raw speed, and he's very gung-ho about how he expresses it. He's aggressive in how hard he likes to push, but the value of that is limited a bit by current cars and tyres. But yes, in style, he's aggressive with the car, very happy to manhandle it, very early and hard on the throttle, capable of being extremely quick. But at the moment, he's also capable of totally screwing his tyres and therefore being slow late in the stint, as we saw in Brazil. And that's experience, and I suspect there's a Grand Prix winning driver in there, but only time will show if he has the supporting qualities to be a world champion. Very few reach that level.
Yeah, and I think the good thing about Behrman is he does also seem to have that good mentality as well. There's a lot of ability there, so I think we're very interested to see how he fares in his first full season after this bizarre 3 one-off appearances he's had this year as a super sub. But one thing I will add to that is our colleague Scott Mitchell-Malm watched all of Behrman's race in its entirety from the Brazilian Grand Prix, and he actually said that other than the mistakes, of which there were obviously too many, which kind of ruined the race, he was actually really good. Now, that's not making excuses for it. It was still overall a bad race for that reason. But I think that tells you that point about that Mark said about the potential, that it shone through even in a pretty horrible race.
What really impressed me is, I mean, you could look at the 2 previous cameos and go, okay, well, he's in the Ferrari. You can't really compare him to Leclerc because it's, he dropped in FP3. So it's a bit of a strange random start. And then Baku, he was really impressive, but it was described as a bit of a bogey circuit for Hülkenberg. And, you could write that off as a kind of one-off underperformance from the established teammate. But Brazil is a known Hülkenberg speciality track where he's been mega consistently throughout his career. And I felt like Behrman coming in unexpectedly and just trouncing him, let's face it, in the early sessions on over 1 lap there, taking into account that Hülkenberg says he's not really feeling great with the car at the moment and he's been a bit behind Magnussen since Magnussen sorted the brakes out. I just thought that was mega from Behrman to be that good compared to who has probably been the best, most consistent midfield driver in F1 this year. That's a great benchmark to hit straight away, isn't it? Regardless of the fact that clearly everything's still a bit untidy at the moment.
The next question for you, Ben, comes from James Mellier. Given recent promotions for Ollie Behrman and Franco Colapinto, Liam Lawson, and with Jack Doohan and Kimi Antonelli stepping up next year, and Gabriel Bortoleto, of course, if you were advising a young driver, which academy team alliance would you be telling them to join?
Oh, that's a tricky one, isn't it? There's so much more choice now. I think that's the main point. The days of it being a kind of, Red Bull only or Red Bull plus a handful of other teams funnel are kind of over. I think it's still the case that certain academies, like Williams' although it's been great for Colapinto, hasn't worked out so well for his predecessor Logan Sargent. That one still feels a bit in its formative days. I know it's been around for a while, but obviously the state of that team being such a mess for a long time, I feel like they're still building that up. Whereas at the other end of the scale, the sort of former totem one, Red Bull, that's actually been quite a mess. And Lawson's recent re-promotion, if you like, seems to have been born more of the fact that others are taking the punt rather than Red Bull kind of getting its act together on drivers. I think they've almost been suppressing their younger drivers, kind of waiting for a breakthrough talent like Max to come around again. And they've sort of been juddered into action by others. So you kind of maybe want to avoid those 2 extremes. And then everyone else is kind of sitting at quite a happy middle ground, backing their young drivers, which is good to see. You probably want to think about how stocked full of drivers each place is, because every team is looking for that one guy that they really want to get behind and push through. And if you and the guys advising you really feel like you've got that, you've got the Antonelli quality, you've got the Piastri quality, you want to be in a place where you feel like you're going to get the maximum attention from that academy. You're going to get the most simulator days, the most exposure to the race team, the most testing mileage in an old car or what have you to get you ready, because it seems like that now counts for much more than what you're able to do in the junior categories in terms of performance and results. And Behrman's the best example, right? His F2 season has been objectively pretty terrible, but he's locked in at Haas, doing great things in cameo appearances in F1. So I think the emphasis is shifting now to how much time can you get in actual F1 activity to prove yourself to the team that you join, and that's going to be crucial in terms of making your decision.
Yeah, there's a lot of competition for these drivers to bring them in. I think actually Williams have done quite a good job in terms of their academy now. They were latecomers to it, but they've now put 2 drivers into Formula One.
Yeah.
They've got their TPC program firing up as well. So there's positives to that, but it just shows there's so much choice. And it depends, doesn't it? You want to be the anointed one, which has benefited Antonelli, say, in Mercedes, whereas it's not been so good for the ones who are less so. But if you're not going to be the best junior in an academy, then you're not going to be the one that gets
Aaron or Vesti, for example. They've lost out on that regard. But I think the point is now every team pretty much has a legitimate, proper academy or process for dealing with junior drivers, apart from Haas, but they're kind of tied in with Ferrari. So they're de facto part of the Ferrari one, right?
Haas have got their TPC program themselves starting next January. The Toyota deal has facilitated that. So Haas can now start to get into that, and they do intend to do a proper TPC program. They may even use Kevin Magnussen in it as a bit of a benchmark driver. So it's just become a key part of the game. It's like scouting for a football club. It's just essential. But probably that's the key piece of advice. It would be important to look at what drivers they have in their stable, and where you might or might not fit in with it, and the age profiles and all those sorts of things.
Yeah. And then once you've considered that, certain ones have more offshoots, don't they? So an academy like Alpine or Ferrari, involved in wider motorsport to a higher degree, gives you kind of options if the F1 thing doesn't work out. Whereas if you're in a more narrowly focused academy like Red Bull is, like Williams, Mercedes, I think as well, you've got fewer options there if you're not the anointed one. So that's got to play at least some role in your decision making. Yeah, and it's certainly very, very difficult, especially if you're making that choice for a driver who's a 12-year-old Carter. You're having to throw forward a good 5, 6, 7 years, which is very, very difficult to do. The final question also comes from James Melia. With this year's Drivers' Championship almost wrapped up, is it realistic to think that we could have a 4 or 5-way battle next year between Max Verstappen, Charles Leclerc, Lewis Hamilton, Oscar Piastri and Lando Norris, and maybe even George Russell not far off for Mercedes? It's possible. History tells us it's less likely, but there is a pathway where it could happen, and you could have, in an ideal world, 3, maybe if Mercedes crack it, which is a big ask, admittedly, 4 cars that sort of globally have the same sort of average level of performance, but they kind of move in and out of number 1 spot depending on the track characteristics. That would be the dream, wouldn't it? Where you've got that happening. But I guess history tells us that's pretty difficult. But it's not. I mean, put it this way: if you'd asked that in April, we'd have all gone, not a chance. But it tells you much about the way the season's gone, that actually it's plausible. Does anyone want to back the 6th driver or more fight for the title for next year?
Yeah, I mean, it's always fantastic at this time of year to think about how fantastic it's going to be the next year, isn't it? Because there is, you can make a case out for it. You can make a logical case out for why this team is going to get there and why that team is going to get there and why this team has got a ceiling on it. And but as you say, history usually disappoints you in that sense. I think the thing in favour of it is just this tricky rule set. As Mark was explaining earlier, I think in the Mercedes segment, the cars are so generically difficult to get on top of and keep on top of. There seems to me to be much more potential now than there was in the past for teams who've got an advantage to just give it away or lose it. And that brings naturally more people into play as that ebbs and flows. So that's kind of what we've seen in the second half of this year. And under stable rules, providing all those people don't figure out, the key and everyone just ends up in a consistent place, then it'd be nice if that continued all the way through 2025 before we throw it all in the bin. I think, though, the good thing is that for now we can all dream of this battle next year. So let's have all 4 of those teams in there
with Antonelli as well. Let's throw Aston Martin taking a step forward into. Why not?
They're going to have to take a huge leap forward, though, aren't they?
Look, pre-season is the time for optimism. So everybody's imaginary 2025 season at the moment could be absolutely brilliant with multiple race winners, ding-dong battles at the front. Brilliant.
I think even with Adrian Newey on board, I don't think Aston Martin are going to go from where they are now to title contenders over one winter.
Oh well, I'm still having that dream that with Sauber up there as well. This is that's my optimistic vision for
Bortoletto for the championship.
But yeah, the good thing is, to come back to the question, it's not completely unrealistic that it could play out with say 3 teams at the front. It's sort of inch towards that this year, so we can but hope. Well, thanks very much to everyone who sent in questions. Thanks to Ben and Mark for your answers. We're still in a blank week in Formula One before we start heading towards Vegas, but stay with us for everything you need to know from the world of Formula One.
The Athletic.